Hi, welcome back to my channel. Now, for the longest time, I've been a regular contributor to the Senses of Cinema World Poll. Senses of Cinema is an Australian film website, and every year they poll critics and writers around the world for their 10 best films of the year, and I've been contributing to this since about 2002. In the description below, I'll give you a link to the latest version where you can see my top 10, but I thought I'd just run through them very quickly for you. Now, I don't go to the cinema much anymore. If I go to the cinema, it's usually the London Film Festival. I wait for things to come out on Blu-ray and DVD, not even streaming. I'm very old-fashioned. So that often means I'm watching things way after their release date. So I'm not calling this video the best films of 2022 because I don't know what are the best films. I'm saying that these are the best sort of newish or recent films that I've seen in the past year. And I'm going to tell you them in alphabetical order, which means that number one, and this was my highlight of the past year, is David Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future. I've talked about this in another video, so I won't talk about it too much here. But suffice to say that it was Cronenberg, one of my favourite directors of all time, coming back and being David Cronenberg, writing his own scripts. I can't tell you how important that is. So he went back to his old stamping ground of biological transcendence and goo and gore and weirdy-beardy science fiction, which is where I like him. And I loved this film. Great cast, sometimes a bit difficult to decipher their dialogue, but I thought this was a superb film. I'll leave a link at the bottom to the video where I discuss this movie in more depth. The second film I chose is Checkmate, by an Indian director called Shivendra Singh Dungapur. And he's in love with Czech cinema. He's one of the people who is a programmer for Second Run DVD, an excellent DVD label in the UK, who've done so much to raise the profile of Eastern European cinema in the UK. And this is it's like an 8-hour, 9-hour long documentary. It goes on forever. It's subtitled In Search of Jiri Menzel, who made the famous film Closely Observed Trains. Actually, not one of my favourite Czech movies, but that's beside the point. And he's the sort of base of the whole movie, a sort of long extended interview with him. But it basically covers every single director working in Czechoslovakia from the late 50s through to the early 70s. It's an amazingly comprehensive documentary. If you are a lover of cinema history, it is a must. It's very indulgent, it's very baggy, it goes in and out. It really could have been edited down by about 3 hours, really. It's like a great big DVD extra for cinephiles. I liked it very much. I thought it was very charming. It covered every base, every filmmaker, and he interviews most of them. So if you're a fan of film history, it's well worth checking out. And it's a corrective to this idea we have that in the 60s, everything was about French cinema, and that's where all the creativity was. It wasn't. My God, the Czech cinema was absolutely heaving with great directors and brilliant new ideas and freshness and originality. And this documentary really shows that. And it's a good guide to what you need to look for in Czech cinema, which is so incredibly rich. The third film I picked was First Cow. What a great name for a movie. Now, this is the latest movie by Kelly Reichardt, who's a current sort of critic's darling. She's a filmmaker. I've watched nearly everything she's made. And I'm still not quite sure what I think of her, really. I'm not quite sure that I buy into her as a great filmmaker. The thing about Kelly Reichardt is I keep remembering that joke of Woody Allen's. It's like life is like going into a fancy restaurant. It tastes delicious, but the portions aren't big enough. And that's how I feel about Kelly Reichardt's films, that what there is good, but it's not enough. It's like a piece of mood music rather than a fully formed work of art. I think this film is her best film so far, and I don't think it's a coincidence that her two best films are both westerns. Her filmmaking seems to suit the western, and the western seems to suit her. So this and Meek's Cut-Off with Michelle Williams, I think, are her two best movies. And I do think this is a very good movie, and I like the look of it very much. I like the way she's captured the natural rawness of the forest and the landscape. So it's well worth checking out. The fourth film I've picked, I've also spoken about this in another video of mine, A Hidden Life. This is the latest film by Terrence Malick. This, comes a long time after The Tree of Life, where some people think Terrence Malick went mad and lost the plot. And since then, he's gone from being one of the popes of cinema to being, absolutely trashed every time he releases a movie. And this movie was almost completely ignored on its release. I'm not saying it's one of Malik's best. It's not. It's about the life of a an Austrian farmer who decides that he's not going to join the army and he's going to conscientiously object, and the imprisonment he goes through and the persecution his family faces. Um, it's looking at that side of the war from a different angle, and it's very beautifully filmed. It's not one of Malik's greatest films, but I recommend it. I strongly recommend it. The fifth film I picked was Introduction. This is a film by the Korean director Hong Sang-soo, who is currently my favourite film director currently working. I think he's a genius. Describing his films and why they're great is very hard though. This is just about a young guy, and the film is it's very short, just over an hour I think. Yeah, 66 minutes. And it's just about, three meetings. Him meeting his dad, and his dad's more interested in treating this patient. Meeting his girlfriend, who he surprises, I think in Berlin, yeah. And meeting his mother with a friend. That's it. I think it's the most charming, most mysterious, most enigmatic, and funniest film of the year. And it's one of Hong Sang-soo is such a good filmmaker because he defies description, really. He defies exegesis. You just have to watch it and experience it for yourself. I love this filmmaker. People think this is a minor film by Hong Sang-soo. I enjoyed it as much as anything else I've seen in the last 3 years. Also this year, I caught up with the latest two films by the Dardenne brothers, who I was very fond of in the 2000s. They were two of my favourite filmmakers currently working. Two Belgian filmmakers who made social realist films in their local town of Seraing in Belgium. Their latest two films have been rather patronised. The first is Young Ahmed, which was made quite a few years ago now, about a young Muslim who is sort of groomed by fundamentalists and attacks his teacher. And it shows him going into the Belgian justice system and going through young offenders units and all the rest of it. It's a film that got attacked because these are two old white men making a film about Islamic fundamentalism. What do they know about it? Which I think is just currently the most crass form of film criticism going. But why can't we comment on other human beings? That's what art is. But actually that kind of crassness in film criticism these days is de rigueur. It's the fashion, it's the mode. I think the film is not as strong as the Dardennes' previous work, and I think in some ways it's very naive. The ending is terrible and lets down the film badly. But I kind of praise the Dardenne brothers for taking on such difficult material that most people these days are turning away from in fear or because they don't want to tackle it. And they tackle it head on, and I think with intelligence and sensitivity. It's a shame that the ending lets it down, but I think it's a good film and it's worth checking out. Their most recent film, which came out this year, is Torry and Lockiter, which I've also spoken about in another video, and I'll give you a link to that. I liked this film very much. It's got a bit of Children's Film Foundation feel about it, about two African immigrants, again going through the Belgium social system, trying to get their citizenship, and in the meantime being exploited by drugs runners and dealers in Belgium. It's got an adventure feel about it, which I think some people thought was a bit silly, but I think adds to the film's charm. And I think it's a very good film, and again, well worth seeking out if you've not found it. The next film, my seventh film, was Martin Eden by the Italian director Pietro Marcello. I'd seen some of his shorts beforehand, and I didn't much care for them. I was surprised how much I enjoyed Martin Eden. It's an adaptation of the Jack London novel. And one of the things I like about this film, it's made by a modern art house director, but he's very faithful to the book. And also, he's faithful to its themes. He doesn't try to modernise them. He doesn't try to put on a postmodern gloss or an art house gloss. In fact, he tells the story as if it's never been told before. And he stays absolutely true to its rhythms, its themes, its mindset. It's a very classical piece of cinema from a modern art house director. And that's one of the things I like about it. I kind of admire that. I kind of admire Marcello's commitment to the original novel. And the story, which is a basic story of a young man from a working class background, trying to become a writer, right? But he treats that story as if it's never been told before, and gives it all the oomph and all the sort of, the sort of thematic grace that you'd expect in an old movie, but now you'd expect it to be sort of put through a modernist prism. But he doesn't do that, even though he's a modernist filmmaker. I kind of admire that. I quite like that about it. My eighth choice is Midsummer. This has been around for a while, but I only got to see it last year. I'm a sucker for anything folk horror, and this is pure Wicker Man territory, right? It's made by Ari Aster, who made Hereditary, a horror film that I thought was brilliant for its first hour, then I thought it vanished up its own bum. So I was a bit sort of in two minds about whether to watch this or not. I absolutely loved it, and I watched the long director's cut as well. And you know what? I won't talk about this film too much, but just briefly, what interested me about Midsummer is, after I watched it and I really enjoyed it, I started looking around the internet for reviews of it, right? And I found something very curious, that so many of the people who reviewed this movie clearly didn't get it, because it's a black comedy. Like The Wicker Man all those years ago, it's not a straightforward horror film. It's got a sense of humour. The Wicker Man is a black comedy, about a virgin, upright, upstart, Christian going to an island of hedonists, right? And pagans who are all having sex with each other. There's a comic element to it. And similarly, there's a comic element in this film where you get people bashing people over the heads with big hammers. It's not meant to be taken entirely seriously. And that's part of the charm of the film. And I was surprised at how many major reviewers from major websites didn't seem to get that. It's a key part of the attraction of the film, I think. Oh well, tell me what you think below. The ninth choice I had was The Northman. Now, this is a massive guilty pleasure. This is Robert Eggers' big, Viking film. Robert Eggers is a rather odd filmmaker. He makes a big show of making something that's very much of period, with well-researched and everything, with the feel of the period, But then he just adds loads of fantasy, which is complete nonsense and is completely made up by himself. So what was the point? It's kind of neither a really period piece, nor is it really a fantasy piece. It's a kind of queasy in-between. But I think if you can accept that, his films are quite amusing. The Northman amused me greatly. It's full of, half-naked, Norsemen going, "Wah!" And beating each other up, and witchcraft and silly fantasies. If you can put up with all that stuff, and it's great fun actually, and it looks gorgeous. It's very silly. If you take it too seriously, it's nonsense. But if you just sit back and ready for sort of lots of, Ethan Hawke doing that is just hilarious. But if you can put up with that, it's great fun. And finally, Pacifiction, probably the most important, certainly the strangest film of the year, from Albert Serra, who is the great modern cinema punk. By which I mean he's the one who's not following the rules. He's the one who's constantly being provocative. A lot of people think that Albert Serra is someone who is really just offering provocations under the guise of serious art house cinema. I think it's the other way round. Really, they're outwardly provocative, but actually underneath they're very intelligent films. And I think he's a very interesting director. Pacifiction is a very difficult film to talk about. I reviewed it from the London Film Festival. I'll give you a link below. It's a film about a sleazy, corrupt French politician in French Polynesia, on an island in French Polynesia, and he discovers that the French authorities are planning to do more nuclear tests without his knowledge. And it goes from him trying to sort of seduce women on the island to him trying to find out what's going on. That makes it sound like a narrative film, like an espionage thriller. It's more like a sort of lazy, I don't know even how to describe it. It just sort of, it never seems to get anywhere or do anything, yet it haunts you for days after seeing it. It's an extraordinary film, one to watch for real hardcore cinephiles, I think. I also, from TV, I really enjoyed this, The North Water, which I've also talked about in other videos. It's a good seafaring saga, men at sea, starring Jack O'Connell and Colin Farrell. about this whaling ship out of Hull in the north of England, and terrible things start happening on board, and it becomes a fight for survival. I don't know why I'm talking in that accent, but I just feel I ought to. Great fun, beautifully shot, very well directed by Andrew Haigh, who's an excellent young British film director, made 45 years. That's worth tracking down if you fancy a good, exciting seafaring saga. Also in the top 10 list below, I mentioned my three biggest disappointments of the year. The first is Jane Campion's Power of the Dog. Why people insist on calling Jane Campion one of the great directors of our time, I have no idea. I think she's really third rate, and I think this was a terrible film. How it got nominated for an Oscar, I'll never know. Benediction by Terence Davis was a huge disappointment to me. I'm a great fan of Terence Davis. This was his life of Siegfried Sassoon. It didn't work, and it didn't work because I think that the whole sort of formal strategy and structure of the movie just didn't work. I think that Terence Davis made a fundamental error here in thinking that Siegfried Sassoon himself was interesting, when really the only thing that's really interesting about Siegfried Sassoon is his attitude and his poetry about the First World War and what the men were going through. Once you take that away, he's not a very interesting character. And the rest of the film concentrates on that. You get about 20 minutes of the film is about the war. And there's a very good scene with him. He has some kind of breakdown, and he goes to an asylum, and he has an interview with his psychologist stroke therapist, who I think is played by Ben Davis. And that scene is excellent. And the stuff about the war is very moving. And then the war ends, and it's about the life of Sassoon afterwards and how he's scarred by it. But that's not very interesting. And it turns into, him and his affairs in upper middle class English society. It's not very interesting. And the whole form of the film is a bit sloppy and a bit clumsy. It goes back and forth, but not in a very interesting or well-structured way. A bit disappointing. The other big disappointment was The Eternal Daughter by Joanna Hogg, which I've also spoken about in a video, which I'll also give you a link to, which is Joanna Hogg doing a kind of ghost story film with a really, really grotesquely obvious twist. And it stars Tilda Swinton in a double role as a mother and daughter. She's very good in it. It's a bit of an actor's workout movie. But the movie around it is a bit gauche, I think, a bit jejune for a director who's now on her sixth feature film and has been working since the 2000s. It's a bit embarrassing, I think. So those are my top 10 films that I saw last year. Let me know below the other films that you thought I should watch. I'm always out for recommendations. And let me know what you thought of the films I've mentioned. And if you like my content, please like and subscribe. Thanks very much.